Hi everyone, thank you for joining this webcast. My name is Nimrod Geva and I manage the KWIZ product group. Today I'm going to speak about CalendarPlus app. Before I start, just a quick overview on KWIZ. We've been developing add-ons and apps since 2005 and we operate from Toronto, Canada. The CalendarPlus app is actually a part of a bigger package which includes several web parts. The package is called DataView toolset, and this is an SPFx package. And once you install it, you get all these web parts, and they all work on SharePoint Online, SharePoint 2019 server, and also inside Teams. These web parts includes, for example, the org chart web part, which enables displaying org chart based on Azure Active Directory, SharePoint profile service, SharePoint list, Excel file, and so on. Another example is the SharePoint list aggregator, which aggregates data from various data sources. In these screenshots, you can see aggregation from Azure Active Directory and also from OneDrive. Another example is the calendar web part, which you see here. This is the subject of this session. On the left, you see the list view web part, which connects here to a remote list and displays it with some conditional formatting rules, and also displays nicely in a handheld device due to the fact that all these web parts are mobile friendly. They're all fully responsive. Another example is the Team Gallery web part, also part of this package, which enables aggregating pictures from various sources and displaying them in all kind of gallery displays. And finally, there's the DataView web part, DataView Plus web part, which is a superset of all these web parts, which enables also creating custom layouts, custom templates. For example, you see a risk chart, and on the right you see a social networking streams and layout. Okay, so today's topic is one of these web parts, which is the CalendarPlus web part. So let's focus on it. So as I mentioned, the CalendarPlus web part enables you to connect to various data sources. The most common ones are Exchange Online to display Outlook, personal Outlook, or shared calendars. Also, most customers connect to SharePoint lists. These can be team calendars, and also SharePoint aggregation and search. This is needed when you need to aggregate multiple calendars and display them in an overlay. Let's start with the, this is a screenshot of something that I'm going to show you. Here, for example, you see a combination of three web parts, three CalendarPlus web parts. So in the main part, you see a calendar showing my personal Outlook. And on the right, you see a shared calendar configured to show daily view. And below it, you see a group calendar showing the R&D group calendar, also configured to show daily view. So let's start from scratch. First thing you need to do when you work with the CalendarPlus web part is, after you add it to the page, you need to connect it to a data source. After you connect it to the data source, you configure its layout. So let's begin by connecting it to a data source, and I prepared three different examples. Let's begin with the first example and connect the web part to a list view. Okay, so I have an empty page. Let's switch to edit mode. And let's add the calendar web part to the page. Okay, so you see an empty web part. What we need to do now is configure its data source. You can do it by either clicking here on the left side or on this icon that says also configure data source. Currently we have no data source, so I got an empty page. Let's click add a data source and let's give it a name. So I'm calling my data source meetings, and I want to connect to a team calendar list that I have in this site. So let's select the SharePoint list data source. Now I have to select the site where the list exists. Now it doesn't have to be the current site. It can be a different site or a different site collection. It doesn't matter. I will leave it as is and select the list. So it's called Team Calendar. And once you select the list, you need to select the view. And I have several views here. I'm going to select the meetings standard view. And as you can see, you see the result immediately here on the left. Okay, let's continue with these settings of the data source. Okay, so I connected to a list view. I got some additional properties, like I can limit the number of returned items and so on. Let's leave it as is, and I'm going to the next column mapping tab. Now this is where you need to map the properties returned by the data source to the properties needed by the calendar. Like every calendar must have a subject which is displayed when you're looking at the calendar, and there are some additional properties. The other mandatory one is the start date. You cannot have events without a start date. So but because we are connecting now to a calendar list, all these properties are automatically mapped, so you don't need to do anything. But if you connect to a custom list with some other column names, you will need to map them to these calendar columns. Finally, I can add color coding, and color coding per data source is relevant when you're connecting to multiple data sources, and that's what I'm going to do now. So let's create a color coding for the meetings data source. So let's have it white over blue. And I can optionally select an icon that will show on the legend. Let's select something. Let's search for an icon for a meeting. Yeah, here it is. So that's it. Let's add another data source. And I'm going to connect to the same list, but to a different view, which shows a different category of events. This time, this one will show birthdays. So let's call this data source birthdays, and again connect to a list view and to the same list actually. So I'm selecting the birthday standard view, and again I'm going to set up some color coding for this data source. And let's have some icon. Let's search for a birthday icon. Yeah, we have a nice cake. And finally, I'm going to add the third event. The third data source. And this one will connect to a different view. Let's call it Get Together, which is another category. And let's configure its color coding. So let's do it white over brown. And let's select some appropriate icon for it. Yeah, there's a team icon here. Okay, let's see what we have. Okay, so here's our calendar. We've got 3 data sources. All these 3 data sources actually connect to the same list. Simply, they connect to different views, but each view is a different data source. We've got a legend. With the legend, we can switch on or off any of these data sources. So for example, if I click the meetings legend, it switches it off so you don't see the meetings event, and I can switch it on again. Okay, so we saw in this example how to connect the web part to a list data source type. Let's continue with the to the next example. So in the current example that you've just seen, I manually added 3 data sources. Now imagine that you need to show 20 data sources or 30 or more. So this method of manually adding your data source is quite limited. Looking at the second example, the PM dashboard scenario, here I'm looking at a more dynamic aggregation. And the example is, imagine you have a project site per each project in your company, and projects are created on a weekly or monthly basis. And you wish to display all the milestones from all these projects in one consolidated view. So one way to do it is like we did in the first example. Every time you have a new project site, you need to go to your CalendarPlus webport and add a new data source for this project to get the milestones from this project site. What I'm going to show now is a different data source. It's not a list data source, it's list aggregation data source. And you configure its query and its starting point, and it dynamically aggregates from that point whatever you want to aggregate. It means that you won't need to update the settings every time a new project site is added. So that's why I'm saying it's a dynamic aggregation. So let's have a look at this example. Okay, so I have this web part. It currently aggregates milestones from several projects, and these projects are actually on a different site collection. Let's look at the settings of the web part. Okay, I'm opening the data source settings, and although you see 3 projects in the calendar, you can see we have only a single data source. It's called project milestones. The type is different than the last example. It's not a SharePoint list type. It's a SharePoint list aggregator type. Now, the SharePoint list aggregator runs a cross-site query. So the first step is to configure the query definition. We're using a built-in mechanism in SharePoint. As you know, every list view is actually a query definition because a list view includes the definition of which columns I want to display and which filter criteria I want to apply. So this is actually a query definition. So instead of asking you to write a query in some way, what you need to do is select the aggregating list view. So just select a list view that you want us to use as a query definition. So you just select a site and a list and a view, and that view is used as a query. So we don't care about the data in this specific list. We're just using the view that you picked as a query definition. So in this case, I'm going to a different site collection, to the project milestones list, and I'm using the all items view as my query. Second thing you need to configure, I'm skipping over these properties here, you need to configure your aggregation scopes, which means against which bunch of sites you want to run your query. And you can create multiple aggregation scopes. Currently, you see I have only one aggregation scope. Let's see the settings. So I called it all project subsites, and the scope is a specific site and all its subsites. You can select other scopes like entire site collection or a specific site or specific lists even. Currently, this scope includes a site and subsite, and the starting point is a subsite called projects, because all my project sites, all my project subsites are below the project site. So this is my starting point. And now you got a bunch of properties that allow you to further limit this aggregation scope. So for example, here I'm limiting the aggregation scope only to lists that their name ends with the string milestones. And I can also limit my aggregation scope by site name. So I can say, I want you to aggregate milestones only from sites that their name follows some pattern. Next, I can also limit the aggregation scope by specific list types. And it can be multiple types. It's a multi-choose. And finally, I can limit this aggregation scope by content type. Once I apply it, I have my aggregation scope and I have my query, which is defined by the aggregating view. This will run the query which gets all the items actually from all the milestones lists, from all the sites and subsites in this scope. And in this way, I can add additional aggregation scopes. But now with this scope only, every time I will add a new project site in the same location, another project subsite, it will be included in the query results. So this is how you get these results. You may also notice that the filters here are a bit different. There's also color coding. I'm still not getting into the layout settings. It's the next topic. Before that, I'd like to show you the last data source example. Okay, so the last example is for the Graph API data source. Sorry, one thing I want to mention before. I showed you just now the SharePoint list aggregator data source, which allows you to aggregate events from many sites and subsites. There's also the SharePoint search data source. SharePoint search data source allows you to aggregate across your entire tenant and faster than the list aggregator, but it requires a bit of administration overhead because you need to properly manage your manage properties. You need to configure them. So you got these two data sources to choose from when you want to aggregate from multiple subsites or from multiple site collections. Now let's get to the Graph API data source. I'm going to my last example. You already saw a screenshot of this example. So what I have here are 3 CalendarPlus web parts. The main one, the big one, shows my personal Outlook. And I configured some filters and the legend here and the color coding. And the ones on the right are the shared calendar web part. This one connects to another user's shared calendar. Of course, he shared it, otherwise I wouldn't be able to show it. And the final one is the R&D group calendar, which shows a group calendar. Now let's go and see the settings, the data source settings of these web parts. Okay, so let's begin with this web parts data source settings. So we have we have here a single data source called main data source, and the type is Graph API. And once you select the Graph API data source type, we expose all the Graph API properties. Now, this is a bit technical. Graph API, for those of you who are less familiar, is a unified API that allows getting any Office 365 resource. It can be Azure Active Directory or Exchange Online or OneDrive. There's one unified API for all of these. So when you want to get a resource, information from any resource, you need to provide the graph path and which columns you want to retrieve, and optionally you can provide a filter statement and so on. So it's a bit technical. To save this from non-technical users, we provide examples. So all you need to do is just click the button and select what information you want to get from Exchange or from group calendars. And once you select it, we put here the relevant parameters that are needed. Of course, you can change it. So for example, if you want some other columns from Exchange, you can just replace these. Okay? So in this example, I'm getting my personal calendar. Now let's switch to the shared calendar example. So you will see, again, it's Graph API data source, but here I selected the second example. So the user's shared calendar example. When you select it, you get this string where you have here user ID, and I replaced the user ID with the user's email. This is the user who shared his calendar, and now I can view it. Okay. As for the group calendar example, let's look at the data source in this case. So again, it's Graph API, but here I selected the third example, group calendar. And in this case, you'll get here after the groups and the slash character, you'll get a parameter called group ID, and you need to replace it with the group ID. And this you can get either from Outlook when you go to the group, or from the SharePoint site of the group, or from Teams. Okay. By the way, we're going to replace this with an easier to use Graph Designer, which will save you the trouble of finding the ID. This will be coming shortly in the next version. Okay, so that's how you connect to Outlook or shared Exchange calendar, or to group calendars. Of course, in these examples, I connected each of the calendars here to a single data source, but you can also overlay. So you can, in the same calendar, I could have my personal Outlook and a shared calendar and some group calendars all in one display with overlay of all of these. I just put them in separate web parts to show you also different layouts, which is my next topic now. Okay, so we connected our web part to one or more data sources, and by default they are displayed in an overlay. And now it's time to configure the layout of the calendar. So let's go to one of our sites and switch the page to edit mode. When switching to edit mode, you see how this page is constructed. So you see these building blocks, they are called controls. So we have here the conditional formatting control, then we have the filter control, which displays these filters, and finally we have here a calendar control. And this is the default layout. I didn't do anything, I just connected to a data source and I get this. You can change this layout. If you go to the top part and go here to the gear icon, you can see this part where you can turn on features. So by default, you see that the conditional formatting and the search are turned on. That's why you see the filters, and that's why you see these colors. But there are additional controls such as a menu bar, tabs, paging, folders. All of these are switched off, and you can add them to the UI. Now, for each of these controls, you got the gear icon, which allows you to further on customize or configure these controls. And I'll start with the main one, the calendar control. Let's click the calendar controls gear icon. By default, you see these view properties. So it's the start view, which is the default view that user will see in the calendar. So as you can see, by default, we see the monthly view. That's because it's configured this way. You can select any other views. Then you see the available views. As you can see, we have 3 available views. That's because it's configured to show the monthly, weekly, and daily according to this order. You can add additional views. For example, let's add the day agenda view. So you see it's reflected immediately in the UI. You see here we have the daily agenda view. Okay, so you control which views are available and their order and the default one. Then let's revert to default. Then you got these properties show only business days. It's switched on, and that's why you see only days Monday to Friday. You don't see the weekends. Of course, you can switch it off. And allow text to wrap in grid views such as a monthly view. This is also turned on. Now, these are the basic properties. There are more properties, and you can see them if you switch to advanced mode. The reason we did it is because we didn't want to overwhelm non-technical users with too many properties. So in simple mode, we just show the most common one, and in advanced mode, we show more properties, such as language. If you don't select any language, of course, we will use the default site settings. Maximum content height here, this allows you to limit the height of the web part. You can also limit the number of displayed items in the monthly view. And if there are more than 6 items, 6 events in a day, like in this case, you will see more link. Start view, this also appears in the simple mode, so I'll skip it. Business days, by default, we take the business days according to the site settings, but you can select the business days. Same for business hours, you can define the start and the end of the business hours. And then you got the event click. What do you want to happen when the user clicks an event? So by default, we open the view item pop-up. So for example, if I click this event, you'll see the regular SharePoint view item form, but you can change this behavior, okay? For example, you can say, by default, I don't want to open the view item form. Instead, I want to call an event which will do something, and I will get to it when I'll talk about advanced customization such as using JavaScript. Okay, so this is about the Calendar Plus customizations. Now, the calendar control customizations. Now, next thing I want to show you is more customizations of other controls in the layout. Okay, so I already showed you the conditional formatting control, and I just want to get back to that example. Switching again to edit mode. So as you can see, we have 3 conditional formatting here. Let's see how they're configured. So if you remember, I have different colors for different projects. And the way it's configured, if I go to this rule, so clicking here, I can see the color settings, the color and the background, and I can also set up an icon. And this rule is applied for the entire item. And I'm clicking here the condition. There's one condition for this rule. And the condition compares the site title to project A. So, and the same thing is done for project B and project C. So this is how I applied different colors for different milestones, for milestones coming from different projects. But let's set up a different conditional formatting rule. So I'm deleting these ones. And let's set up, and you see now that I have no colors. Let's set up a new color. You see that some of the milestones have a cost column with some value. So I want to highlight the milestones, no matter from which project they come. I want to highlight the milestones that their cost is greater than $10,000. So the more significant milestones will be highlighted. So let's add a new rule, a new conditional formatting rule. First thing is apply the colors that you want to have. So I'm clicking this icon. I can choose also an icon. You know what? Let's search for a dollar icon or a money icon. Yeah, okay. And I want to apply, I want it to be black, the yellow background. Okay, next let's give it a name. So let's call it high value cost. And I want to apply it in the entire item, and I'm going to the conditions part. And here I'll have all the columns. So let's select the cost column, and the condition would be if the cost is greater than $10,000. And I can create more complicated conditions by adding additional property-based conditions with and or operators between them. Okay, so you can create quite complex conditions. Clicking save and close. And now you can see that only the milestones that their cost is greater than 10,000 are highlighted with yellow background. The others are not. So it's that simple to add conditional formatting rules to your calendar. The next control that I wanted to show you is the filter control. The filter control allows you to add custom filters that will appear above your calendar, enabling end users to easily find events. So let's get back to our calendar here. You see I have a filter control with two filters that I configured. To add filtering fields, you simply, in edit mode, you click the plus icon here, and you can add any custom filter that you want to add from the fields that you have in your data source. Let's save it as a draft. I want to show you how this filter behaves. So every filter has pickers according to the type of the filters. For example, this is a numeric field. The cost is a numeric field, so it has a picker. So for example, let's show only milestones that are above $10,000 more or less. You can also use the picker to select distinct values that appear in the data source. Okay. And finally, even though this is a numeric field, you can always treat it also as a text field. So you can filter by simply typing a number. Okay, so now it filters by $10,000, showing only milestones where the cost is $10,000. And this is true to all the all the filters. So for example, this searches by the owner. So I can select an owner, or I can type in owner. Okay, or part of the name, or I can select multiple owners, or I can do all except some value. Okay, so all the filters, no matter what type they are, behave this way. Now I can reset my filter, of course, and I can save my filter as an end user. So next time I open this page, it will remember the recent filters that I configured. Okay, let's switch to edit mode to see the filter control properties. Okay, so we got here the show free text filter. If I switch it on, it will add a text filter. Not a filter, but a text search box. It will search across all the data source column. I can add additional filter fields from here, like I did directly from the web part, and I can change their order. Switching to advanced mode, I want to mention this last property, which is called hide from users. And this sometimes might be very useful. Sometimes you want to configure a filter and save it for all users. And then you don't want users to be able to change this filter. For example, let's say I want to show in this calendar only billable milestones, and I don't want users to change this filter. So I can save this filter for everyone as an administrator, and then hide this filter from everyone by switching this on. See, if I click it on, you'll see a message here that says this control will be hidden from users. So I will see it, but only in design mode. And by the way, you can add multiple filtering controls. For example, you can have one filter group control which is hidden from all users, and you can add above it another filter control that will include filters that you want users to be able to change. Okay, so you can have multiple filters. One is hidden and one is visible. Okay, the last control that I want to show you is the tabs control. And this enables me to display multiple calendars. Each groups a certain type of events. Let's go to another calendar here. Okay, I have this calendar which displays events in an annual list view. It's a different view. And now I would like to group the events by location, by the room. So I want each room to have a separate tab with the events that are taking place at that room. So let's edit the page again, and let's edit the web parts layout. And I'm adding groups or tabs. So I'm adding tabs control. So here I have the default tabs. Let's edit this control. So by default, it groups by all the event column. I want to change it and group by the location column. Okay, so now you can see I have a tab per room. So meeting room 2, there are 4 events this year that are not allocated to any room, and meeting room 1. So that's another way you can display your calendars, by displaying multiple calendars by grouping by some column. Next thing I want to show you is how you can integrate your calendar web part in Teams environment. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, the calendar web part is part of the QuizCon DataView tools package. So once you install the package on your tenant app catalog, you need to sync it with Teams. You just do it by clicking this ribbon button in your tenant catalog. And now when you go to your Teams environment and you add a new tab, you will see the DataView Plus package available. You just select it and then add it to Teams. And from that point, you'll see the DataView Plus package options, which are all of these web parts. And you just select the web part that you want to display in the tab. In this case, it will be Calendar Plus, but it can be any of the other ones. And once you select the web part, you'll be able to set it up. You'll get this default layout, but you can set it, configure it, and change all the settings that I showed you so far. Okay, last topic I want to talk about is how you can further customize the layout using the style editor and how to use the JavaScript API. Okay, so let's go back to our list. And I got here my calendar. And I would like to make some style changes. For example, make the day headers bigger and maybe add some background to these headers, and also make the event titles bigger. And finally, maybe also change the tab styles, add some background to the selected tab. So let's edit the web part. And let's edit the web part layout. Now scrolling down, you'll see the custom styles section, and here's the style editor. I'm just clicking this link and it opens the style editor, which enables me to override any style. We've got some snippets that you can use for various controls that we have here. Let's start by pasting 3 styles. So this one changes the event title size and make it a bit bigger. You know what, let's make it 18 pixels. And this one changes the day headers styles. And finally, I'm changing the month view selector buttons background color and the font color. So let's see the result. Okay, so you see the day headers are now bigger. I've got a gray background here, and looking at the events showing in the calendar, the title is much bigger. And I also have the month view selector colored with blue background. That's it. It's very simple. This way you can override any part of the UI, including the filters, including tabs, including the legend. Any change that you want to make is very easy by just overriding the styles. Okay, we reached the end of the session. I just wanted to remind you that the CalendarPlus app is available on our website for free evaluation, unlimited free evaluation. All you need to do is just go to our website, go to the product page, and follow the installation instructions. In case you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or to contact our sales team at sales@quizcom.com. Thank you. Bye-bye.